My name is Emma Mitchell, and I've always been the go-to person for writing help at Riverside High School in suburban Boston. Whether it's editing essays, proofreading college applications, or helping with creative writing assignments, I'm the one my classmates seek out. It's not just because I'm the editor of our school newspaper and president of the Creative Writing Club, it's because I genuinely love helping others find their voice through words. But when James Anderson approached me that crisp October afternoon in our senior year, I had no idea that helping him would turn my whole world upside down. I was sitting at my usual spot in the school library, surrounded by scattered notebooks and my laptop displaying the latest draft of the newspaper's editorial, when James's tall figure cast a shadow over my workspace. My heart did its usual little flip, the same one it had been doing since freshman year whenever he was near. "Hey, Emma," he said, running a hand through his perpetually messy dark brown hair. "I could really use your help with something." I tried to keep my voice steady as I looked up at him. James and I weren't strangers, we'd been in the same friend group since middle school, but we weren't particularly close either. He was the star quarterback with a perfect GPA who somehow managed to also be genuinely nice to everyone. I was the quiet bookworm who preferred the company of words to crowds. "Sure, what's up?" I managed, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. James sat down, and I couldn't help but notice how he seemed unusually nervous. He kept fiddling with the strap of his backpack, his green eyes darting around as if making sure no one was within earshot. "I need help writing a letter," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "A love letter, actually." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I maintained my composed exterior. Of course, someone like James would have a crush. Of course, he'd want to write her a love letter. And of course, he'd come to me for help because that's what I do, I help people with their writing. "Oh," I said, proud of how neutral my voice sounded. "That's different from the usual college essays I help with." He laughed softly, and the sound made my treacherous heart skip another beat. "Yeah, I know it's kind of old school, but I really want to do this right. She's special. Really special. And I'm terrible at putting my feelings into words." I nodded, ignoring the dull ache in my chest. "Well, you've come to the right person. Do you have a draft already?" James pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his backpack. "Kind of. I've been working on it for weeks, but everything I write sounds either too cheesy or not sincere enough. I want it to be perfect." As he handed me the paper, our fingers brushed briefly, and I quickly pulled back, hoping he hadn't noticed how my hand trembled. I smoothed out the wrinkled page and began to read. The letter was, well, it was exactly what you'd expect from a teenage boy trying to express his feelings for the first time. There were crossed-out words everywhere, attempted metaphors that didn't quite land, and several spots where the ink had clearly gotten smudged from frustrated erasing. But beneath the awkward phrasing and cliched comparisons, there was something undeniably genuine about it. "It's not completely terrible, right?" James asked anxiously, watching my face as I read. I looked up at him with a small smile. "No, it's not terrible at all. Actually, there's something really sweet about it. We just need to help you express these feelings more clearly." For the next hour, we worked on the letter together. I helped him refine his metaphors, suggested better ways to structure his thoughts, and encouraged him to speak from his heart rather than trying to sound like a romantic poet. All the while, I tried to ignore the growing ache in my chest, the bittersweet irony of helping my crush write a love letter to someone else. "You're amazing at this, Emma," James said as we finished the third draft. "How do you always know exactly the right words to use?" I shrugged, attempting to hide behind my long auburn hair. "I just read a lot, I guess. When you spend enough time with words, you learn how to make them dance." He looked at me then, really looked at me, with an intensity I'd never seen before. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. But then he glanced down at his watch and jumped up. "Oh shoot, I'm late for practice. Coach is going to kill me." He hastily gathered his things, carefully folding the latest version of the letter and tucking it into his pocket. "Thank you so much, Emma. Really. This means more to me than you know." I watched him hurry out of the library, my heart heavy with unspoken words. As I packed up my own belongings, I couldn't help but wonder about the girl who would receive that letter. Would she appreciate the thought and effort James had put into it? Would she understand how lucky she was? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would unfold in ways I never could have imagined. Because sometimes, the most profound truths hide in plain sight, and the most beautiful stories often start with a little heartbreak. That evening, as I lay in my bed staring at my ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. About James's nervous energy, about the way his eyes lit up when we found just the right words to express his feelings. I thought about the mystery girl who had captured his heart so completely that he'd want to write her a love letter in this age of quick texts and Instagram DMs. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Olivia Chen. "Hey Em, you okay? You seemed kind of off at newspaper meeting today." I hadn't realized it had been that obvious. Then again, Olivia had been my best friend since we were 5. She could read me better than anyone. "Just tired," I typed back, then deleted it. Olivia deserved better than a half-truth. "James asked me to help him write a love letter today." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by, "What? Are you serious? OMGM, that must have been torture. Do you want me to come over?" I smiled despite myself. This was why I loved Olivia. She understood exactly how difficult this afternoon had been for me. "I'm okay," I replied. "Really?" It was actually kind of nice in a weird way. He's so genuine about his feelings for her. Whoever she is. Still, Olivia texted back, "That's like emotional masochism. You've been crushing on him since freshman year." I stared at her words, remembering how it all started. It was during our first week of high school, when James had defended a sophomore from some senior bullies. He hadn't done it in a showy way, no dramatic confrontation or fighting. He'd simply walked up, put himself between the bullies and their target, and talked them down with a mixture of charm and quiet authority that left everyone impressed. That was the moment I'd started falling for him. "Maybe this is exactly what I needed," I texted Olivia. "A reality check. He's clearly in love with someone else. Time to move on, right?" But even as I sent those words, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Because helping James write that letter hadn't diminished my feelings for him. If anything, seeing his vulnerable side, watching him struggle to express his deepest emotions, had only made me fall harder. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, newspaper deadlines, and trying not to think about James or the letter. I threw myself into editing articles, helping freshmen with their English essays, and working on my own college applications. But every time I saw James in the hallway or during lunch, my mind would wander back to that afternoon in the library. He seemed different, somehow more distracted, almost nervous. Several times I caught him looking in my direction during AP Literature, but he would quickly look away when our eyes met. I told myself not to read too much into it. He was probably just anxious about giving the letter to his crush. On Friday afternoon, as I was locking up the newspaper office, I found another crumpled piece of paper on my desk. My heart stopped when I recognized James's handwriting. It was another draft of the letter, but this one was different from what we'd worked on together. The words seemed to flow more naturally, more personally. At the bottom, he'd written a note. "Emma, I need your help one more time. Meet me at the oak tree behind the football field after school on Monday. James." I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at his neat handwriting, trying to understand why my hands were shaking. It was just another editing session, right? Just another chance to help James perfect his declaration of love for someone else. So why did it feel like something more? As I finally left the empty school building, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze rustled the autumn leaves, carrying with it the promise of change. Little did I know, Monday would bring more changes than I could ever have imagined. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones we don't see coming, and sometimes the most beautiful truths are hidden in the words we help others write. The weekend crawled by with excruciating slowness. I must have read James's note 100 times, analyzing every curve of his handwriting, every word choice, searching for hidden meanings that probably weren't there. By Sunday night, I had driven myself and Olivia through countless texts nearly crazy with speculation. What if he wants to ask my opinion about how to give her the letter? I texted Olivia for the 1,000th time. Or maybe, she replied, he wants to tell you that you're the one he wrote it for. I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't see me. Don't even joke about that, Liv. I've seen the letter, remember? It's definitely not about me. But despite my protests, a tiny spark of hope had taken root in my chest. I remembered how nervous James had seemed lately, the way I'd caught him looking at me in class. The way the second draft of the letter had felt somehow different, more personal. No. I couldn't let myself think like that. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break your heart. Sunday night, I could barely sleep. I tossed and turned, plagued by dreams where I was reading love letters that kept changing their words every time I tried to focus on them. In one particularly vivid dream, I was standing under the oak tree, but it had grown so tall I couldn't see its top, and James's voice was calling down to me from somewhere in the branches, reading words I couldn't quite understand. Monday morning dawned gray and misty, matching my mood perfectly. I went through my classes in a daze, barely registering anything the teacher said. During AP Literature, I noticed James's seat was empty. My stomach churned with anxiety. Was he sick? Had he changed his mind about meeting? But then I saw him in the cafeteria during lunch, sitting with his usual group of friends from the football team. He looked up just as I was walking past, and our eyes met. He gave me a small, nervous smile that made my heart flip, then quickly looked down at his phone. The rest of the day passed in a blur. When the final bell rang, I took my time packing up my things, trying to calm my racing heart. The oak tree behind the football field had been a favorite spot of mine since freshman year. I often went there to read or write when I needed some quiet time. The fact that James had chosen that specific location felt significant somehow, though I tried not to read too much into it. As I walked across the empty football field, the late afternoon sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting intermittent golden patches on the grass. The oak tree stood majestic and solitary, its leaves starting to turn brilliant shades of red and orange. James was already there, leaning against the trunk, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his Letterman jacket. He straightened up when he saw me approaching, and I noticed he was holding something, not just a piece of paper this time, but what looked like an actual envelope. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual despite the thundering of my heart. "So, what's up?" James took a deep breath, and I was surprised to see that his hands were shaking slightly. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you." But before he could continue, a sharp voice cut through the air. "James? What are you doing here?" We both turned to see Sarah Matthews striding across the field toward us. My heart sank. Sarah was head cheerleader, homecoming queen, and exactly the kind of girl someone like James should be writing love letters to. Of course it all made sense now. The letter was for her. "Sarah?" James sounded genuinely confused. "I thought you had cheer practice." "It got cancelled," she said, reaching us and giving me a quick, dismissive glance before turning her full attention to James. "Listen, we need to talk about the homecoming committee meeting. Principal Martinez wants to change all our plans for the dance, and we need to figure out how to convince him." I started to back away, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I should go," I mumbled. "You two obviously have things to discuss." "Emma, wait." James called after me, but I was already walking away as fast as I could without actually running. I heard Sarah's voice saying something else, then James's response, but I didn't stop to listen. I made it all the way to the parking lot before the tears started falling. Stupid, stupid, stupid. How could I have let myself hope, even for a second, that this story might have a different ending? I was fumbling for my car keys when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. "Emma, please wait." It was James. He must have run to catch up with me because he was slightly out of breath. I quickly wiped my eyes, praying my mascara hadn't smeared too badly. "It's fine," I said, still not turning around. "You should go back to Sarah. The homecoming committee needs you." "Sarah's not, this isn't." He made a frustrated sound. "Emma, would you please look at me?" Something in his voice made me turn around. He was standing closer than I expected, still holding that envelope in his hands. Up close, I could see that it was a pale blue color, with something written on the front that I couldn't quite make out. "The letter," he said softly. "The one you helped me write. Did you ever wonder who it was for?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. "Read it," he said, holding out the envelope. "Please." With trembling fingers, I took the envelope. And there, written on the front in James's neat handwriting, was a single word. "Emma." My head snapped up, my eyes meeting his. "But I don't understand. When we were working on it, I changed some things," he said, taking a step closer. "The first draft, the one we worked on together, it wasn't quite right because I couldn't tell you everything I really wanted to say. How could I, when you were sitting right there? But after that day in the library, I realized I couldn't keep pretending anymore." I looked down at the envelope again, hardly daring to believe this was real. "So all this time?" "All this time," he confirmed. "Since freshman year, actually. Remember that day when you stood up in English class and read your poem about the stars? The one about how some lights take years to reach us, but they're worth waiting for. That was the moment for me." My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the envelope. James reached out and steadied them with his own. "Open it," he whispered. "Please." But before I could break the seal, another voice shattered the moment. "James. There you are." This time it was Coach Stevens, hurrying across the parking lot with a thunderous expression. "Emergency team meeting, right now. No excuses. The school board is threatening to cut our funding for next season, and we need to put together a presentation tonight." James looked torn, his hand still covering mine on the envelope. The coach was already turning away, clearly expecting James to follow. "Go," I said softly. We can talk later." He hesitated for another moment, then quickly squeezed my hands. "Tonight," he promised. "I'll call you tonight, okay?" I nodded, clutching the envelope to my chest as I watched him jog after Coach Stevens. My mind was spinning, my heart performing a complicated gymnastics routine in my chest. As I finally got into my car, I looked at the envelope again, still sealed, still holding whatever words James had written just for me. Should I open it now? Wait until he called? The weight of it in my hands felt both terrifying and wonderful. But sometimes the universe has other plans for how our stories should unfold. Because just as I was about to break the seal, my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything once again. The text was from Olivia, 911. "Need you at hospital now. Mom had an accident. Please come." My hands shook as I shoved the still unopened letter into my bag and started the car. Throughout the 15-minute drive to Boston General Hospital, my mind raced between worry for Mrs. Chen, who had been like a second mother to me, and the lingering echo of James's words, "That was the moment for me." I found Olivia in the emergency room waiting area, but something was off. Instead of looking worried, she seemed guilty. "Liv?" I approached cautiously. "What's going on? Is your mom okay?" She jumped up from her seat, wringing her hands. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Mom's fine, she's at work." I needed to get you here, and I knew you'd come right away if you lied about your mom being in an accident. I stared at her in disbelief. Olivia, what the hell? I know, it was terrible. But Emma, there's something you need to see. She grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward the hospital corridors. Liv, stop. What are you talking about? But she just kept walking, practically dragging me along until we reached the pediatric ward. Through the large observation window, I could see James still in his Letterman jacket sitting by the bed of a small girl who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. He was reading to her from what looked like a picture book, making animated gestures that had the girl giggling despite the 4 tubes in her arm. That's Sophie, Olivia said quietly. James's sister. I turned to her in confusion. James doesn't have a sister. That's what everyone thinks. What he wants everyone to think. Olivia took a deep breath. Emma, I overheard my mom talking to another nurse. She's been Sophie's primary care nurse for the past 3 years. Sophie has a rare form of leukemia. She's been in and out of this hospital since she was 4. My mind struggled to process this information. But, why would James keep this a secret? From what I understand, his parents divorced when Sophie was diagnosed. His mom, she couldn't handle it. She left. James and his dad decided to keep Sophie's existence quiet to protect her. They didn't want her to be the sick girl at school, didn't want people gossiping about their family drama. I watched as James carefully tucked the book away and pulled out what looked like homework sheets. Sophie's face lit up as he started explaining something, probably helping her keep up with her schoolwork. He comes here every day after school, Olivia continued. Every single day, Emma. Those times when everyone thought he was at extra football practice. He was here. Those weekends when he turned down parties. Here. My hand unconsciously went to my bag, where James's letter was burning a hole through the fabric. All those times I'd seen him looking tired in class, all those mysterious appointments he had to rush off to. But why are you showing me this? I whispered. Because, Olivia said, I saw the way he looked at you today in the parking lot. And I know you've been carrying a torch for him forever. But Emma. Sophie's getting worse. The treatments aren't working like they used to. My mom says. She swallowed hard. She says they're running out of options. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. So you thought, what? That I needed a warning? I thought you needed the whole truth before. She gestured vaguely at my bag. Before whatever's in that letter changes everything. James isn't just James the perfect quarterback with the perfect life who might be in love with you. He's also James the guy who's been fighting a silent battle for years, who might be about to lose the person he loves most in the world. Through the window, I watched as Sophie said something that made James throw back his head and laugh. Despite the pallor of her skin and the tubes surrounding her, she had his exact same smile. Does anyone else at school know? I asked. Olivia shook her head. Just me, and that's only because my mom's her nurse. Emma, I'm sorry I tricked you into coming here. I thought you should know what you might be getting into. I stood there for a long moment, watching James with his sister, feeling the weight of his letter in my bag. Everything I thought I knew about him was shifting, rearranging itself into a new picture that made so much more sense. His maturity, his kindness, the way he never seemed to get caught up in petty high school drama. Oh. Olivia suddenly pulled me back from the window. He's coming out. We barely managed to duck around the corner before James emerged from Sophie's room. Through the gap between the wall and a supply cart, I watched him lean against the corridor wall, all the cheerfulness he'd shown Sophie draining from his face. He looked exhausted, worried, and so much older than his 18 years. A doctor approached him, carrying a clipboard. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw James's shoulders tense, saw him run a hand through his hair in that nervous gesture I knew so well. The doctor placed a sympathetic hand on his shoulder before walking away, leaving James alone in the corridor. That's when I heard a muffled sob. Just one. James pressed his palms against his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and straightened up. By the time he started walking toward the elevator, his face was composed again, showing nothing of the brief breakdown I just witnessed. After he was gone, I turned to Olivia. I need to read that letter. Emma. No, Liv. I need to read it now. I pulled the pale blue envelope from my bag, my fingers trembling as I finally broke the seal. As I unfolded the pages, a small photograph fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It showed James and a tiny, beaming Sophie at what looked like a carnival, cotton candy all over both their faces. On the back was written, "The real reason I need to believe in love letters." Taking a deep breath, I began to read. Dear Emma. Remember when you told me that the best writing comes from truth? Well, here's my truth. Dear Emma. Remember when you told me that the best writing comes from truth? Well, here's my truth. I'm not the person everyone at school thinks I am. I'm not even the person you've been helping write this letter. I'm just a guy who's been pretending to have it all together while his world has been falling apart piece by piece. But here's another truth, whenever I'm around you, I feel like maybe I don't have to pretend so much. You probably don't remember this, but in sophomore year, there was a day when I was sitting alone in the library, trying not to fall apart. It was right after we'd gotten some really bad news about Sophie's condition. You were shelving books. I guess it was during your library assistant period. You noticed me and, without saying anything, you left a copy of Bridge to Terabithia on my table. I never told you this, but I read that book 3 times that week. I read it to Sophie too. She loved it, even though I had to skip some parts that hit too close to home. That book helped us both through one of the hardest weeks of our lives, and you didn't even know it. That's who you are, Emma. You just notice things. You notice when people need help, even if they don't ask for it. You notice the quiet kids in class who have something to say but are too scared to speak up. You notice the freshmen who get lost in the halls but are too embarrassed to ask for directions. You notice everything except how extraordinary you are. When I asked for your help with this letter, it wasn't because I needed help finding the right words. It was because I needed the courage to finally tell you the truth. About everything. About Sophie. About how I've been in love with you since that day in freshman English when you read your poem about the stars. About how watching you help everyone else with their stories made me wish I could be brave enough to tell you mine. Remember how you told me that day in the library that sometimes the hardest letters to write are the ones where we're most afraid of the answer? You were right. I've started this letter 100 times, but I always stopped because I was afraid. Not just of you saying no, although that terrifies me too, but of letting you see the mess that is my real life. Sophie is my whole world, Emma. She's been fighting this battle since she was 4 years old, and she's the strongest person I know. But the doctors say, they say we might be running out of time. They're talking about experimental treatments, clinical trials, things that might work or might just give us false hope. Every day, I go to school and pretend everything's fine, then spend my evenings in the hospital, pretending for Sophie that I'm not scared out of my mind. The thing is, I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you. You once asked me why I chose to write a love letter instead of just talking to the girl I liked. The truth is, I chose to write a letter because words on paper are the only way I know how to be completely honest. When I'm around you, I get tongue-tied. I forget all the things I want to say. I forget how to be anything other than the James everyone expects me to be. But here, in this letter, I can tell you everything. I can tell you that your smile makes my day better, even when it's been the kind of day that makes me want to scream at the universe. I can tell you that watching you edit the school newspaper with that little furrow of concentration between your eyebrows makes me wish I was brave enough to just walk up and smooth it away with my thumb. I can tell you that Sophie asks about you all the time now. The pretty girl who helps you with your writing, she calls you. She says any girl who helps her big brother write love letters must be a princess in disguise. Her words, not mine, though I can't say I disagree. I can tell you that when you're editing someone's work, you get this look on your face like you're not just reading their words, but really seeing them, really understanding what they're trying to say. And God, Emma, I want you to see me like that. All of me, even the parts I've been trying so hard to hide. I know this isn't fair. I know I'm asking a lot, dropping all of this on you at once. I know my life is complicated and messy and probably not what anyone dreams of when they think about first love. But I also know that if there's anyone in the world who might understand, it's you. You see, that poem you wrote in freshman year wasn't just about stars. It was about how some things are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, even when the light takes years to reach us. You wrote about hope like it was a tangible thing, something we could hold on to in the dark. I've been holding on to that hope for 3 years now, Emma. Hope that someday I'd find the courage to tell you everything. Hope that maybe, just maybe, you might feel something for me too. Hope that you might be willing to step into my complicated world and make it a little brighter, the way you already do just by existing. So here it is, my truth, my heart, my hope. I love you, Emma Mitchell. I love your kindness, your wisdom, your quiet strength. I love how you fight for other people's stories to be heard. I love how you believe in the power of words to change lives, because you've already changed mine. I don't expect an answer right away. Take all the time you need to process this. If you decide this is too much, I'll understand. I'll still be grateful for every moment I've gotten to spend with you, even if they weren't quite what I hoped they'd be. But if there's any chance, if you think you might be willing to take this leap with me, I'll be waiting under our oak tree tomorrow after school. No pretenses, no masks, just me. Just us. Either way, thank you. Thank you for helping me find these words, even if you didn't know they were for you. Thank you for being someone worth writing love letters to. Always yours, James. P.S. I've enclosed a picture of Sophie and me. She insisted I include it because real princesses need to see who they're rescuing. Again, her words. She reads a lot of fairy tales in the hospital. But I'm including it because I want you to know all of me, including the most important part of my life. P.P.S. Remember that day you told me that the best love stories are the ones we don't see coming? I hope you were right about that too. I read the letter 3 times in the sterile hospital hallway, my vision blurring with tears. Olivia stood silently beside me, one hand on my shoulder. Emma, she finally whispered. Are you okay? I looked up at her, clutching the letter to my chest. I need to see Sophie. What? But I need to meet her, Liv. Not tomorrow, not later now. Something in my voice must have convinced her, because 5 minutes later, thanks to Olivia's mom's nurse credentials, I was standing outside Sophie's room. Through the window, I could see her working on what looked like homework, her small face scrunched up in concentration. She looked so much like James it made my heart ache. I knocked softly on the door frame. Sophie looked up, her green eyes identical to her brother's widening with curiosity. Hi, I said, suddenly nervous. I'm Emma. I'm a friend of your brother's. Sophie's face lit up with recognition. You're the princess. I couldn't help but laugh, even as I felt tears threatening again. I don't know about that. You are. She pushed herself up straighter in her bed, excitement making her pale cheeks flush. You're the one who helps Jamie with his writing. He talks about you all the time. Did you get his letter? Did you like it? Are you going to rescue him? I moved closer to her bed, drawn by her enthusiasm. Rescue him? Yeah. Like in the stories. Sometimes the princess has to rescue the prince, you know. Especially when the prince is being silly and scared and taking forever to tell the princess how he feels. I sat down in the chair next to her bed, James's chair, I realized. You're pretty smart, aren't you? I have to be, she said matter-of-factly. I'm teaching Jamie how to be brave. It's a big job. That startled a laugh out of me even as my heart squeezed. How's he doing with that? Better now, she said, giving me a surprisingly knowing look for a 7-year-old. He finally gave you the letter, didn't he? I nodded, showing her the pale blue envelope. He did. And you know what? I think you're right about the rescue thing. But maybe. I leaned in conspiratorially, maybe sometimes the prince and the princess can rescue each other. Sophie's eyes lit up. I like that. That's like in Frozen, where. She was interrupted by a gasp from the doorway. We both turned to see James standing there, his face a mixture of shock, fear, and something else I couldn't quite read. Emma? What are you, how did you? She came to meet me. Sophie announced proudly. I told you she was a real princess. James was still frozen in the doorway, looking between Sophie and me like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I stood up, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. Your sister's been teaching me about bravery, I said softly. She's very good at it. He took a shaky step into the room. Emma, I can explain. I read your letter, I cut him off gently. All of it. And James? I moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. You never needed help finding the right words. They were perfect just the way they were. Really, he breathed. Instead of answering, I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and tasted like hope. Behind us, Sophie let out a delighted squeal. When we broke apart, James rested his forehead against mine. I was going to wait at the oak tree tomorrow. I didn't want to wait, I whispered. We've waited long enough, don't you think? He laughed softly, wrapping his arms around me. Way too long. Gross, Sophie commented cheerfully. But also kind of perfect. Can Emma help me with my English homework now? Because Jamie's really bad at explaining metaphors. James groaned. Thanks a lot, sophomore. Well, you are. You kept saying a love letter was like a football play. That was a perfectly good metaphor. It really wasn't, I teased, making Sophie giggle. As I settled back into the chair to help Sophie with her homework, James perched on the arm beside me, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I realized something. This wasn't just an ending to our love letter story. It was a beginning, messy and complicated and beautiful, full of challenges and uncertainty, but also full of love and hope and the kind of magic that comes from finally finding where you belong. Because sometimes the best love stories aren't the ones in books or movies. Sometimes they're the ones that start with a crumpled first draft and end with the realization that every word, every pause, every moment of waiting was leading us exactly where we needed to be. Sophie fell asleep an hour later, her homework forgotten as we told her stories about stars and princesses and the different ways people can be brave. As James tucked her in, I watched them and felt my heart expand with so much love it almost hurt. Stay, he whispered when he was done, holding out his hand. I took it, lacing our fingers together. As long as you need. Could be a while, he warned, but he was smiling. We've got a lot of story left to write. I squeezed his hand. Good thing I'm good with words then. And there, in the quiet of the hospital room, with Sophie's peaceful breathing and the steady beep of machines creating their own kind of poetry, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful love letters aren't the ones we write on paper. They're the ones we live, one day at a time, one word at a time, one brave choice at a time. This was our beginning. And it was perfect.